Hey, good day, my beautiful children. Today is Monday, May the 18th, and this is our last week of school. Yay! I'm actually pretty bummed because I miss you guys terribly. And I don't know. I hope it's obvious to you. Maybe it's not, but I love my job and what I do. And the biggest reason for that is you guys. You guys uh, make me happy. Not all the time, but most of the time. And I miss you guys. Um, So be looking. We're gonna have our Zoom meeting. I think for you guys, it's gonna be on Monday, maybe. Um, Monday or Tuesday. I have to check. I posted it. I'll remind you guys. But we're gonna get together one last time so I can see your bright, shining faces and uh, we can catch up with each other. All right. So we're continuing today with our discussion of Gandhi, who's this really interesting character in history and one of the few people who was able to bring about great change and positive change without any sort of violent acts whatsoever. Um, so we spent last week talking on Thursday about India and what their history was like under British rule, and there was a real need, at least from the Indian perspective, to take back control of their own country and kick the British out. And Gandhi is going to be one of the leading figures and the key figures in this. So, just to sum up what we talked about, Gandhi starts as a barrister, as a lawyer, working in South Africa for Indian rights, and then later is asked by the Indian National Congress to come back to India to help lead them in their goal of gaining independence from the British. And I mentioned how he did this. So Satyagraha, like I said on Thursday, it loosely translated means truth force. And Gandhi is going to do this through civil disobedience. And that is, he's going to choose laws he feels are unjust or unfair. And he's going to break those laws with the understanding that he is going to end up potentially being possibly beaten or arrested or put in jail. And he's going to take all of it with the idea of showing the British how unfair and how ridiculous their laws are. Um, so some of the things he did, I mentioned the burning of the passes in South Africa, which he was arrested for and put into jail. Boycotts of British goods, which hurt them economically. The Salt March, which broke a law where it was illegal for the Indians to make their own salt. And another thing he did, and you can't see it because his picture is covering this up, is he urged the Indian people not to pay their taxes, and that again, he's hurting the British in their pocketbooks. Where it hurt the most. Um, anyway, he was arrested for almost all of these actions. He spent just over 5 years in prison. If you add up all of his prison time, he spent about 5 years in prison total in his life, which is not a small amount. But rarely would he spend a lot of time in prison at once. It was broken up over 50 years time, 60 years time. The British were terrified of putting him in jail. Uh, One, because every time they did, it made national headlines and not only international headlines. It was, Gandhi, like I said, he was really smart. He always made sure the media was there to document what the British were doing to him. And the more famous he became, the more afraid the British were that something bad would happen to him under their watch. And so they were really uh, reluctant, especially later in his life, as he became this world figure, to put the guy in prison because they were scared to death he would die, and if he died, he'd become a martyr, and chaos would they were afraid that the whole country would go up in flames. So sometimes they wouldn't arrest him. Sometimes they'd arrest his followers. A couple times they arrested his wife instead of him. But they're always careful when they arrested Gandhi because if he died, he would have become, an even bigger iconic figure for Indian independence. All right, so let's talk about the Indian National Congress. So the British slowly but surely began to uh, give the Indian people more rights. The thought in England was, if we give in to some of their demands, maybe they'll go away. They'll stop bothering us, and we can move on and continue to control and run India and make money off of them. And like anything else, if you give someone an inch, they'll take a mile. The Indians, every time they got more freedom or new freedom, they would ask for more. And but there was a problem. There was a split in the Indian National Congress in four ways. And I mentioned this on Thursday. They were split in their beliefs. You had traditionalists like Gandhi, and then modernists. So this is a picture of Gandhi and a guy named Jawaharlal Nehru, and you can see how Nehru is dressed in more modern Indian clothes, and then Gandhi is dressed in the homespun cloth. Um, so this just kind of illustrates. So Gandhi, he wanted to return India to what it was like before the British were even there, and Nehru and others wanted to return India, or wanted India to continue on with modernization, including some British customs and things, but just independent. The other major split was religious. India is huge in population. The vast majority of Indians are Hindu, which is a religious group, but they have millions of people living in India that were Muslim, which is another major religion, and they had other religions in there too. They had Christians and other groups, but those were the two main ones, Hindu and Muslim, and that was a big split. The Muslims wanted their own country, and they were concerned, deeply concerned, that if India gained independence from the British, that they would be ruled by Hindu customs and laws, and that their identity as Muslims would be erased. And so you got four different groups pulling in four different directions. Eventually, what's going to happen is the Muslims are going to form their own group called the Muslim League, and they are going to ask. They want independence, but they want to also split from India. They want their own country so that they could govern themselves and not have to be, um, you know, engulfed by the Hindus living in India. And that's going to cause some major problems. So slowly but surely, this story, by the way, Gandhi lived to be 78. We're going to get to his death here in a minute, but this takes decades. This is going on over a period of 60 years that Gandhi is working towards independence. Anyway, slowly but surely, the British begin to slowly grant more rights to the Indians. They allow, they had already allowed the Indians to form their own parliament, and were released. Were letting up on some of the laws that Gandhi had been protesting. Eventually, they were allowed to elect their own parliament, and they wrote their own constitution, which is the first step towards gaining independence. And then World War II breaks out in the 40s, and we've already learned all about World War II. You know that the British were fighting not just the Germans in Europe, but also the Japanese in the Pacific, and this was taking a tremendous toll on England. And it wasn't just the British; it was all their colonies. So you had Canada and Australia and New Zealand and India. India also was part of it, and India is a lot closer to Japan than England is. And the British needed the help of India to help fight the Japanese army in the Pacific. And Gandhi, very shrewdly, very intelligently, he said, we're not going to help you guys unless you promise to grant us independence when we win." And what's England going to do? They needed all hands on deck, so they agreed to that. And World War II ended, and the British were still dragging their heels on granting Indian independence. So Gandhi started a movement called Quit India, which brought on more boycotts and other forms of passive resistance. And the British, they arrested 60,000 people during this time, but not Gandhi. Again, at this point, he's in his 70s, and they're deathly afraid that if they put him in jail, that he'll die there, and that'll cause more problems than what they already had. So this is a very turbulent time, and there was some violence. Just because Gandhi preached nonviolence, there were some groups that they thought this was going too slowly, and so there would be riots and people would die, and British, soldiers or Indian soldiers that were working for the British would be killed. And every time that happened, it would, set Gandhi's movement back. So this is a really turbulent time in Indian history. One of the things Gandhi would do quite frequently as part of his religion is fast. I don't know if you guys know what fasting is, but that's where you don't eat or really even drink. Um, and there's a lot of reasons to do it, and a lot of religions do this. But when Gandhi would do it, he would do this for days and sometimes weeks at a time, and he would sometimes use this as a weapon to calm people down. So, for example, when a lot of this violence was taking place and breaking out, one of the times Gandhi said, "I'm going to fast until I die, or until you stop fighting, whichever comes first." And so this went on for like weeks, where he wouldn't eat anything. He'd take a little bit of water with some lemon juice, and that was about it. The longer it went on, the more the papers covered it, and uh, and it worked. People put down their weapons and stopped fighting on both sides because they were scared that Gandhi would end up dying. So that was one of the weapons he used. All right, so eventually England agrees finally to transfer power to India, and they set 1948 as the date for when that's going to happen. But so they have these meetings, and Gandhi was invited to them, and the British Prime Minister was there. This is David Lloyd, or what is this? This is Mountbatten, Lord Mountbatten, who was the he wasn't the Prime Minister. He was the Viceroy, the British Viceroy of India. Basically, he was the guy that the British Crown put in charge of running India. Um, so they had all these meetings, and the final outcome was that England decided to grant independence, but they were going to split India into three parts. So the middle part of India would stay India, and that was set aside for the Hindu people. And then they split on east and west sides of India. They created two new areas, East and West Pakistan. Now, West Pakistan is still today Pakistan, and East Pakistan is Bangladesh. So those were set aside for Muslims. And during this time, um, people started to move. So if you were a Hindu living in East or West Pakistan, you started to move to the middle of the country, and if you were a Muslim living in the middle, you started to move east or west into Pakistan. And on the road, as these groups would cross paths, there would be violent skirmishes and riots, and over 1 million people died during this time. It was a very violent time, and for Gandhi, this was terrible. Like, number one, he didn't want India to split into separate countries. That was heartbreaking for him, and the second thing is people were dying, and so this was very upsetting to him, and um, he did not, after all this work he did for Indian independence, when India was finally granted independence, he refused to be the new president or the new leader of India. That job went to Nehru, his friend, and Gandhi just kind of stepped back because he was so upset by the way this all went down. So I don't know why these are covered up, but India and Pakistan became separate countries, and they remain separate countries to this day, and to this day hate each other. They are still constantly fighting over land and other things, and then, oh, by the way, both of those countries somehow have nuclear weapons, which is crazy. So you got these two areas right next to each other who do not like each other, who also have nukes, and it's kind of to this day, a very tense place. Anyway, Gandhi, he retreated to one of his ashrams, and an ashram is like a compound or a commune where people can live peacefully together and share in the work, um, and he lived on ashrams on and off throughout his whole life. Well, he was living on one, and one of a Hindu who was upset that India and Pakistan had split, came to where he was staying, and on his way to his nightly prayers, walked up to Gandhi and shot him twice and killed him at the age of 78. So here's this peaceful guy. All he wanted to do was, bring Indians together and gain independence for his country, and he was murdered by one of his own people over political issues. Um, that guy, by the way, ended up being executed, which Gandhi would have been dead against. He would have been very upset by that, but he was, along with some people who helped plot that. So and it seems to me like, history. This is terrible, but we count on one hand the number of people who have done what Gandhi has done. I would put, Gandhi, uh, Martin Luther King, and Jesus Christ on that list of people who were able to bring great positive change without violence. And all three of those men were killed for their beliefs and for what they were working for, which shows you how hard and how committed you have to be to pull something like that off. The price is very heavy and steep usually. So here are just a few pictures. This is a Time magazine. At the time, it shows you. Now this is pretty offensive, but this is one of the Hindu gods, Shiva, and this is a map of India. So this would be the yellow is India, and then the green here is East Pakistan, and then this is West Pakistan, and it shows you the violence and the bloodshed, and that India is basically killing itself, and that was what the West's view of the partition was. So here's a map of modern India. So you see where Bangladesh is today, still, and there's India, and then here is Pakistan, which used to be part of India, and they are this gray area up here in Kashmir is the area where they're still fighting today over who owns it. So on the border between India and Pakistan, they are still fighting over who owns some of this land. So a couple pictures. This is Gandhi with Nehru. Nehru ends up becoming the premier, the prime minister of India, and you can see how differently they're dressed. Modern, traditional. There you go. This is Gandhi on his way to nightly prayers. This is Gandhi. Every day he would sit and he would spin cotton into cloth, cotton fiber into cloth, homespun. Remember, that was part of his movement, was to make his own clothing and urge Indians to make their own clothing so that they wouldn't buy British cloth. This is Gandhi with a guy named Muhammad Jinnah, who was the head of the Muslim League. This is, and you can see Gandhi liked him, and Jinnah liked Gandhi, but he wanted the Muslims in India to have their own country. And this is Gandhi speaking publicly. He would give speeches all the time. I didn't mention this, but Gandhi, Gandhi would talk to anybody who was willing to sit down and listen to him about Indian rights and Indian independence. And at one point, he went to England he wanted to meet with the prime minister. The prime minister refused to meet with him, but he met with Parliament. And when he stayed there, he sailed there third class, because even though he was a very important man, he wanted to be, part of the common people. And when he went there, he stayed in the poorest part of London with workers, because again, he was just a common dude. So pretty special guy. All right, here he is again. This is him with his wife, and this is him during one of his fasts. You can see how people are crowded around him, and then this is him later in life at one of the ashrams that he stayed at. So here are just a few Gandhi quotes. You've heard probably a lot of these, but an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. That's one of my favorites. That was a quote about against violence. A small body of determined spirits fired by an unquenchable faith in their mission can alter the course of history. That's a pretty good one. I am prepared to die, but there is no cause for which I am prepared to kill. We started the lesson off with that. That's a good one. And then whenever you're confronted with an opponent, conquer him with love. And this is my favorite. When I despair, I remember that all through history, the way of truth and love has always won. There have been tyrants and murderers, and for a time they can seem invincible, but in the end, they always fall. Always. I love that quote. And he's right. We've studied all kinds of world history this year, and we see how violent and powerful men can, for a time, change history, but love ends up conquering in the end. That's why I wanted to talk about Gandhi. I think it's a good message. And the last one, take this one to heart. Be the change you wish to see in the world. If you don't like the way things are, change it. Change it the way you wish it would be, but do it non-violently, with love. All right, that's all I have for today. I'm going to link, I think, a couple of speeches by Gandhi so you can get to see and hear him. But that's all for Gandhi, and I think we will next. I think we'll end up with Africa. I could do China, but nobody ever talks about Africa, so that'll be the last thing we talk about this semester. That's all I have for today. Peace and love. I'll see you guys tomorrow.